Rats. They can be big, they can be small, and they can make a man act up. But, as we will see today, some rats are stimulant-addicted war criminals that have the intelligence of Albert Einstein, but also possess the temperament of your local schizophrenic meth head. With these powers combined, our goal today is to use the cruel and unusual weapons of the Forbidden Workshop to ethnically cleanse the 4 major factions of Bretonnia. Why? Because I hate them and they stink like piss. For the perfect base of operations, we need to look no further than the great undercity of Skavenblight. Now, I know what you're thinking, but do not let this burning pile of abject poverty fool you. This is where the greatest minds of Clan Scryer come together to create some of the most overpowered and unfair machines of medieval warfare. The hero of our story today is Icket Claw, who is a criminally insane abomination that we can easily identify by the meth lab that he has surgically attached to himself. Before I am cannibalized by my subjects due to mass starvation, our first order of business is to take our small terrorist cell and secure our home province. The garrisons in our starting region pray for nothing more than the sweet release of death. As such, they run directly into an onslaught of machine gun fire, turning the enemy force into something that resembles a jar of Doritos salsa. Now that our home was secured, we could look outward to 3 possible directions of expansion. To the east, a not-so-friendly band of zombie pirates. Prior knowledge tells me that upsetting these guys will only lead to my balls getting stomped on by gunnery mobs before my corpse is dragged around by whatever the fuck this thing is. Not good. Instead, I decide to parley with the pirates and look elsewhere.
You are a bitch-made little pussy boy.
We could have also used our scheming rat tunnels to head north. However, these mountains are home to Belagar Ironhammer and several thousand more angry Italian children. For that reason, I decided instead to establish a foothold in the west. I took unnecessary losses in the auto-resolve battle of Margarita, as it was preferable to forcing myself to play even a single siege battle manually. Afterwards, I set my sights to local dickhead, Morga. Now, let me get one thing straight. If there is one thing in this world I despise more than the French, it's the fucking Beastmen. For those who don't know, the Beastmen have unique gameplay mechanics to just disappear and turn invisible whenever they feel like it. This allows them to use guerrilla warfare to literally pop up out of nowhere and fuck up your settlements with impunity, while you, a grown man, sit there and silently sob on your light-up keyboard. To avoid this, I struck a temporary peace deal with Morga, which would buy me some more time while my army recovered. And then I spent the next few turns throwing a Haitian barbecue, where I served up the remaining human armies. After that, I invoked squatters' rights in Morga's home.
What have you done to our house?
It's ours now. Tell us where the extra sheets are and get off our property.
My victories have provided me with warp fuel, which is a fancy word for nuclear waste. Collecting these jars of literal poison allows me to purchase some perfectly balanced upgrades for my weapon team, such as infinite ammunition, invisibility, and who could forget, gout. I went with infinite bullets, and a short time later, Morga had returned, where he found his collection of effigies sitting out on the curb, while his home had been repurposed into a crack house. Understandably upset, Morga challenged my army to a fight. The auto-resolve calculator told me this was a sure thing. However, these calculations must fail to consider the fact that Tier 1 Skaven are absolute useless pussies. Getting mauled by dogs? Run away. Charged by Ungor herds? Run away. The fucking wind changes direction? Quick boys, take advantage of that tailwind and let's run away. After 5 minutes of getting railed by the Beastmen, my once strong battle lines had become nothing more than a scurry of rats, and we lost the battle shortly thereafter. After having an adult man temper tantrum, I did the only respectable thing, which was to kill my which was to reload my save so that I could auto-resolve him into oblivion. I then put the blame for my loss on the Rattling Gunners.
You jagaloons! You're failures!
To correct their behaviour, I increased their ammunition once again to infinity and 6%. I then performed a rite that allowed me to recruit a domestic terrorist. Now that my civilization was established on what I have declared to be the western tumor of the continent, my sights were set on a new target, Castle Carcassonne. Before attacking the Carcassonne capital head-on, I decided instead to use my brain, tactically barbecuing the allied settlements along the way. I also recruited a supporting army of my own, filling their ranks with some of the stinkiest, shittiest units around for what I would call Operation Human Shield. When the time was right, I detonated Wally's vest, kaboom, and attacked Castle Carcassonne with 2 full armies, believing that the walls would be mostly, if not entirely, destroyed from this preemptive strike. I neglected to build siege engines of any kind. But when the Battle of Hogwarts began, I soon learned that Wally had massively oversold his wall-breaking abilities.
What a fucking liar, dude. What a fucking Weasley little liar, dude.
No matter, years of learning from the best military commanders had taught me, you don't need strategy if you're willing to send thousands to die. Which I am. This siege was fought on 2 fronts. My main army was equipped with the Mole People, who specialise in breaking down gates. Once a hole had been punched, thousands of Skaven slaves poured through the gates, drawing the majority of the enemy forces to defend. Because siege pathing is still broken after all this time, the resulting blob of French resistance was an easy target for a nuclear strike. With 90% of the enemy force now either engaged or irradiated, my supporting army pushed in through the rear gates. At this point, the siege was all but won. After taking a staggering amount of losses, the Carcassonne capital was ours. To celebrate, I gave my engineer access to several thousand cases of RPG-7s, and then I spent the next dozen turns or so burning down villages in pursuit of the Fey Enchantress. Unfortunately for her, it turns out that French peasants are cowards in the face of, well, anything, but that's not the point. Especially so when faced with unending streams of radioactive bullets. Once their armies had been destroyed and the smell of piss had left the air, I struck an alliance with a far less disgusting race. I then moved to assert my dominance in the area by exterminating all of the minor French factions. I also took this chance to test out my biological weapons on the Wood Elves, which allowed me to annex their home with ease. My next target was Louin-Leoncoeur,
Louin-Leoncoeur.
or however the fuck you meant to say it, the leader of Couronne. His capital was to my north, and just out of reach on account of him being ruthlessly gangbanged by the undead. I couldn't go over them, and I couldn't go under them, and so my only option was to crack open a couple of beers and get behind the wheel. Normally, I can't stand fighting against the vampire counts, but literally melting hordes of zombies with warp fire and nuclear weapons as they do nothing but mindlessly shamble towards you is one of the most criminally entertaining things you can do. Within a few turns, I had obliterated the undead and I was on my way to meet Leoncoeur. Instead of being thankful for my heroics, however, my new foe sent the Warhammer equivalent of your middle school art teacher to pillage my undefended settlements and ruin my day. I met the Fuggo in the field of battle before she could do any more damage to my settlements. But due to me being certifiably retarded, even trash-tier Bretonnian cavalry charges proved to be an effective weapon against my time-tested tactic of remaining stationary in the field. After an embarrassing defeat, I quickly recovered by filling my ranks with poison wind globadiers. These guys specialize in wielding biological weapons with a concerning disregard for personal safety. This allowed me to then auto-resolve my way through 90% of Couronne's empire. Eventually, I was knocking on the door of Castle Couronne like a manic salesman trying to sell Tupperware. Hello, it's the Tupperware man.
Is this what we have to do?
The French resisted the temptations of my sales pitch, but I had them surrounded. I waited, knowing that without an effective way to store and reheat their food in the microwave, they would soon starve. Several turns passed, but their will remained strong. Eventually, I got bored of waiting, so I murdered them all. The 2 remaining Bretonnian factions were located here and here, which meant that I would soon have to leave my garbage pile behind and go on the racism world tour. The first step was to secure our home against would-be colonizers while we were on our journey. And so, I used my poisonous artillery to clean up the remaining pockets of vampire presence in the north, and then I proceeded to claim the only passageways from the east as my own. Next, I betrayed Grom for no reason other than my own greed. I also did some economy management, but let's be real, no one's here to watch me decide between the rubbish pit and the weapons dump for 45 minutes. Soon, mission border security was complete and I was on my way to my next adventure. Across the pond, we would come face to face with the biggest and baddest of the lizardmen, and so to prepare myself for the battles to come, I made a slight detour to collect the Storm Daemon. The only thing that stood between me and the Storm Demon was the British royal family, who were not giving up their crown jewel without a fight. In an ironic turn of events, it was the English who had not yet discovered gunpowder, and so they were forced to charge hopelessly into unrelenting volleys of Rattling gun. Those who fled were chased down by Stuart Big, and soon the battle was ours. Now that I had the Storm Demon, my next mission was to establish a foothold on the eastern coast of the western continent. To achieve this, I made some significant upgrades to my forces. Cowards were replaced with armored cowards. The bioterrorists received more potent bioterrorism. And I also recruited this big giant wheel. I tested my new weapons on one of Marcus Wolfhart's patrolling armies in an ambush battle. This was just blatantly unfair. This victory gave me hope and also allowed me to take the coastal city of Bretonnia, where I wasted no time shipping over thousands upon thousands of friendly troops. My next target was located here. However, this continent was home to Gorok, Mazamundi, Marcus Wolfhart, and several thousand communists, all of which were quite displeased with my presence and almost immediately declared war against me. Not to be deterred, I got to work securing the province. Swati fell easily,
Sahutek.
but sadly I was forced into a siege battle at Kotax. I came face to face with the Bordeloo at the Battle of Tilanxia, where I turned the majority of their army into an unidentifiable mess, before nuking what remained of them for fun. While my two main armies battled back and forth in the jungles, I had assembled myself a scurvy crew, who I sent to the southern continent to find the home of the last unknown faction. After about 10 turns of reconnaissance, there was still no sign of them. What I did find, however, was an unusually large presence of tomb kings and an abundance of freshly killed peasants. So, draw your own conclusions. Back on the home front, my economy was booming, and I literally had money leaking out of my rat holes. I put my wealth to good use by recruiting as many hell pit abominations as I could afford to aid in the fight against the... Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Against the 5 factions that I was in simultaneous conflict with. These big sexy lads each had more cake than the Greek wedding and more health than most legendary lords. Combine their frankly ridiculous health pool with regeneration and you can literally never lose. While the cast of my 600-pound life pressed south against the Huntsman's expedition, my main army had pushed through to the last bastion of Bretonian civilization. The only thing that stood between me and the arbitrary victory conditions that I had created was Gorok and his bucket full of dinosaurs. Now, some of you may have noticed that in addition to having incredibly high defense, a lot of Gorok's frontline troops have spent the past 10 turns sipping on shield pots, making them extremely dangerous if they were to clash against my armored cowards. To solve this issue, I proceeded to aim every gun I had directly at these shielded bastards. Genius, right? Wrong. I did manage to deal decent amounts of damage to his shielded troops before they got too close. However, this came at the cost of allowing a dragon to sexually harass my backline. In an act of desperation, I gave the lizardman a history lesson on atomic weaponry, and then proceeded to turn the dragon into Swiss cheese. By this point, all sense of formation was gone, and the battle had devolved into roughly 10 individual skirmishes. Assuming the battle was lost, I drove around in circles casting lightning while my machine gun operators were murdered in melee. Perhaps by sheer genius, or by some miracle, the balance of power began to turn more and more into my favor, so I took my hand out of my pants and got serious. After cleaning up the remaining infantry and disposing of the Stegodon, I repeatedly bumped into Gorok until he fell over, winning the battle by the skin of my teeth. Now, I wish I could tell you that my final battle against Bretonnia was another epic fight that grinded both sides down to the last man standing. But by this point, the Bordeloo had been relentlessly cyberbullied by Gorok and Mazamundi for so long that all that remained was a low-tier garrison. I auto-resolved the city and rolled the credits.